And I'm Amrita Basu, and I'm the daughter of the producer of the film, Rasil Basu. So I'm standing in for people who actually made it, but I was somewhat associated with its production too. So, yeah.
How is the government responding to the questions that were asked?
It's a great question. So in the state of Maharashtra, which is where this issue has been even more serious than it has in Punjab, and it was one of the first areas where there was some research into this. There was a lot of activists by NGOs, and social movements are stronger in the state of Maharashtra than they are in Punjab, to respond to it. And so the government did there by agreeing to provide subsidies for farmers. But the package it produced and the kind of protections it provided were very inadequate. There's been an ongoing struggle. And actually, interestingly, some of these state governments have been somewhat more receptive to the demands of activists than the national government has been, in part because state governments are facing a great deal of opposition from groups within the society. The one positive thing that's happened in Punjab, and this happened after the film was released, is that the Punjab government, the state government, decided to put land titles in women's names, which is a big step forward. So, yeah. And it's been one of the demands of a lot of activists now for some time.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things that, I mean, I think a couple of the farmers mentioned in their interviews was like internal displacement, right? That they've moved to a different province and then come back, and so. I mean, we just got a glimpse of it, but can you speak more to like what kind of displacement maybe is going on and where they're going? Are they going to other rural areas to try to find other agricultural work, or is this kind of like an, is this more of like an urbanization, like effect, or what's going on?
Right. So the film opens with scenes of partition and 1947, partition of India, creation of Pakistan, where there was this massive displacement, of course, of people along Hindu-Muslim lines of, Muslims moving to live in what became West Pakistan, and Hindus from Pakistan to India. So in some ways what the film is evoking is both the violence of partition and the ways in which that violence is repeated, although it takes a very different form. The issue of displacement is not, of course, nothing on that scale today as that history of partition, but there has been, I think, a movement of people who are not as involved in agricultural work from urban areas back to rural areas to take up agricultural production once again, but with very limited opportunities to do so productively. So some of the movement of people is in that direction. And then the other thing that the film talks about is that Punjab, what was once a unified state, was divided along linguistic lines to form Haryana, which is Hindi-speaking state, and Punjab, the Punjabi-speaking state, and then Himachal Pradesh. So that division was actually meant that the river waters from the Bias River were diverted away from Punjab, and so the issue of irrigation, the lack of irrigation, has been a very important problem. And so given the uncertainties of the monsoon, farmers are there's sort of a high level of crop failure, and it becomes especially important that the government subsidize farmers when they're not able to produce and sell their crops. So.
I had a question on the music. It's so beautiful. Are these contemporary songs?
No, these are all old songs. Okay. They're all old Urdu songs, and actually many of them are, they are beautiful.
They're stunning.
Yeah, they are.
Amazing.
That's right. And again, very evocative of that history of Punjab's division and of loss of lives and of the sort of sorrow and partition in its multiple meanings, partitioning of families and communities and partitioning of the country. So, yeah.
Why do you, I did a little bit of research on this when I was at sea, but why do you think so much help was given to Maharashtra but not to Punjab? Like even now, like it's basically, like Murray was saying, it's basically a problem that they refuse to acknowledge. Why was it? Do you think it was a religious thing? Do you what why were the farmers? They're like, when I did the research, I did see that other states were getting help, but Punjab wasn't.
Right.
What are the reasons for that?
I think in part because the scale of the problem was bigger in Maharashtra. There was more research that was done about it early on. And I think the other important difference is that Maharashtra has a very strong tradition of social movements, including farmers' movements. There's been a powerful farmers' movement. It's not as strong in Punjab. There's now some greater awareness and consciousness and mobilization around the issue, but not on the scale of Maharashtra. And that's true not only around farmers' issues, but other issues too in Punjab. So I don't think it has so much to do with religion. You know, although it is true that most of the farmers who we see in this area of Punjab are Sikhs, and so you know there may be, some might claim it's related to that, but I think it probably has more to do with the lack of visibility around the issue and lack of mobilization around it.
I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to the ways in which these issues about agriculture, micro-lending, have and haven't been taken up by feminist movements and by women's movements. You know, we see Vandana Shiva speaking very movingly about the kind of gendered aspect of it. I'm wondering, I feel like there's more take-up of that, but I'm just wondering if you can speak to
Yeah,
that.
that's a great question. Well, you know, as you probably know, what's often thought of as the feminist movement is largely an urban movement, mostly centered in the major cities of India, particularly in Bombay and in Delhi, but other parts of the country as well. Although I think, well, feminists have not been as actively involved in rural communities and farming communities. There are now a number of NGOs that are concerned about these issues, and of course, many of these issues are inevitably women's issues. I mean, questions to do with, you know, microcredit loans and are issues that often, just the research on microcredit loans shows that most of the people who take advantage of these loans are women, and you know, the Grameen Bank's experience has shown, but elsewhere as well, that repayment rates tend to be much higher when women are taking out these loans. So in part, I guess, the issue is how to kind of bridge the divides between the issues that activists have taken up in the rural areas, which they haven't thought about as women's issues, and the kinds of issues, particularly centering on violence against women, that feminists have taken up in the urban areas. And I think some more of that is happening partly through the work of NGOs, but they do still remain somewhat separate and distinct.
Did it show a women's center in one of the last scenes, or?
It's a college, a community college that they're attending, but it's interesting too to think about how, you know, the importance of separate women's spaces. So even if it's not an actual women's center, it's a place where women go to get educated and go for vocational training, and that strengthens their connections as a community.
I just had a comment. I mean, Vandana Shiva is amazing, but her comment about sort of recasting fundamentalism as an economic, you know, neoliberalism and sort of all the logic as fundamentalist was so fabulous. And I wonder sort of your thoughts about that, and that feels like such an important intervention into the kind of discourse about, you know, about fundamentalism, but also about capitalism and the market as, you know, this sort of morally neutral force, or, you know, at best, or, you know, I mean at worst, or this morally positive force. So I thought that was a very amazing intervention on her part.
I think it's a wonderful comment, and I think it's so closely connected to the myopia or denial on the part of the government. This is a serious problem. It's not happening, you know, in the way that, where I think the term fundamentalism is useful, because it almost becomes a religious fervor around the belief that this is the path to achieve economic growth, and a refusal to recognize the costs of that growth, and the human costs of it. So the doctrinaire quality of all of this is really striking.
How is it, and is it circulating in India?
It's been shown at a number of film festivals, both in the States and also in India. It's been shown, there have been a number of showings of it in the area that it was filmed in Sangrur and in Punjab. But it has not, there isn't a distributor in the US at this point, so it's been mostly by sort of private circulation and
colleges and universities as well. So, well, thank you so much.
Thank you so
for
much.
attending.